Here is everything you need to know about week 5 of fantasy football and everybody you need to be adding off the waiver wire that have potential to give you very big weeks coming here and for the rest of the season as well. And if you like it when your defense puts up 20 plus fantasy points, go ahead and stick around to the end of the video because I'll give you a list of the top 3 waiver wire defenses we need to be adding that are barely rostered in leagues but will put up a ton of points. So as we get into it, hit that subscribe button. If you want to see these videos every week, hit the like button as well. Our like goal is right here. It helps me out a ton as a person and as a creator. Here's a quick list of players that are rostered in over 50% of leagues, but if they are out there for you, they 100% need to be your number 1 priority. We have some good guys on this list. I want to accommodate for everybody's league size. I will go ahead and put some information about them in the comments of this video, so if they're available for you, go check the comments and see if it's really worth it in your league. But we do need to start this one off with Jalen Tolbert. If you saw the video of players we need to be stashing throughout last week and the weeks before, you probably already have him on your team, but it's not too late. This is just the last time you're going to have to ever get him, because we dive into his stats from last week. He saw 7 catches for over 87 yards, a touchdown. Obviously the game-winning touchdown everybody loves to see, and that was all off 10 targets with no Brandon Cooks. The great news about this is that Brandon Cooks is on IR. He's not slated to return until week 10, and even when he does return in week 10, if it's not week 11, 12, or further, because it is a knee injuries take a little bit longer to come back from, there is no guarantee that he is going to have the same role that he had before the injury in week 1, 2, 3. I fully expect Jalen Tolbert to take this wide receiver 2 role and own it from Brandon Cooks. He had 89% of the snaps last week. That's only going to continue to be up there. He ran some of the most routes on the team as well. And all of that to say, the Cowboys get a really favorable matchup in week 6 coming up here against the Lions. We saw what that game looked like last week with the Seahawks. It is a very pass funnel defense. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for him, a lot of offense being scored in that game. And next up here, we're going to have a Packer. No, it's not Wicks. I wish it was, but he's rostered in over 70% of leagues. He led the team in targets. He led the team in routes run as well. Tucker Kraft, though, is a very, very good add if you need a tight end, which I'm sure a lot of you are dealing with those injuries. But Tucker Kraft comes out with 4 receptions, 88 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, you know me, I'm not one to be fooled by the fantasy football points on a week-to-week basis. Even if we take out those 2 touchdowns and 25 fantasy points, he dominated in every single stat. He had 85% of the snaps. Luke Musgrave didn't have 1. He was a healthy scratch, a guy that was considered to be like his tight end competition in the beginning of the year. He was completely phased out of this offense. The only other tight end to see snaps was Ben Sims. He did not get a target. He was on the field and he blocked for 30% of the snap share. That's all he had. Tucker Kraft is the clear tight end 1 here. He is running all the routes. He's the premier target getting tight end, and he leads every single guy in that position in yards after catch. And if we're talking rest of season rankings, he's definitely a top 10 guy now. Jordan Love didn't have the best game passing, but we know this offense is going to pass a lot. They're going to be efficient. They are pretty good. So there's not a lack of target volume to be going around. Not to mention, they get a great matchup against the Cardinals in week 6, who are allowing top 10 points to every single position. Quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, running back, everything. They're a very easy defense to go against. The Commanders put up a bunch of against them. The 49ers put up some, even though they did lose. Their defense is not great. This should be a get-right place for literally everybody to have a breakout game. I'm starting almost all of them. Tucker Kraft is another start this week as well. But everybody loves running backs, and quickly I will go over Trey Sermon, who is going to be in here for the 2nd straight week. I fully do expect JT to be dealing with this injury up until this week. I don't think it's a guarantee that JT is going to play, but if he doesn't, Trey Sermon is going to be put into our starting lineups here. Last week he comes out with 10 carries, 38 yards. But he did have a huge majority of his usage coming through the receiving game. 6 receptions for 25 yards, 18.3 fantasy points. Now, I do want to give you guys every side of the information. It's pretty easy for me to hold a bunch of statistics and just tell you he's a great fantasy ad. But let's dive into the underlying numbers a little bit more, because he's not as much of a workhorse RB1 as some people make it seem. Tyler Goodson did see 5 carries for 26 yards and a couple receptions, actually 3. But Sermon did lead this backfield in snaps, 41 snaps compared to 29 for Goodson. But you look at the routes run, Goodson actually led this backfield with 22 routes compared to 19 for Sermon, despite Sermon seeing 2 times more of the receiving work. So what that means is that Sermon is still the starting running back in the RB1 here. He did get a majority, if not all, of the red zone touches. They do get a tough matchup against the Tennessee Titans run defense this week coming up, so he is going to be a fringe start, but with JT out, he might be in there. Just keep an eye on the JT injury. The next running back here is Tyrone Tracy, and I do want you guys to be as knowledgeable as possible because a lot of people are telling you to pick him up as well. he is a fine add, and if Devin Singletary does happen to miss this week's matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals, he can definitely be started. But let's dive into the underlying stats. He saw 63% of the snaps compared to Eric Gray at 36. Obviously, that's a big difference. That led him to leading this backfield with 18 carries, 129 yards, 7.2 yards per carry. That is very good, very efficient, exactly what we want to see for a young rookie drafted in the 5th round. Because on the other side, that's compared to Eric Gray being absolutely inefficient, seeing 4 carries for 4 yards. 1 yard per carry. But despite the drastic difference in snaps, again 63 compared to 36% of the snaps, the routes run out of the backfield were actually very, very similar. We see Eric Gray with 12 routes run out of the backfield compared to 17 for Tyrone Tracy. Now, looking at their respective time on field, Eric Gray led the receiving game. You also look, Tyrone Tracy saw 0 out of the 11 third down snaps and 1 out of 5 of the red zone looks for this game. So what we're seeing is that if the Giants are leading these games, Tyrone Tracy is going to be the running back you want. He's going to be absolutely amazing. But more often than not, when the Giants are losing and playing from behind, he's not going to be the guy that's on the field, keeping the offense moving and really getting utilized in the receiving game, despite the 6 targets and receptions that he did have. And again, all of this is assuming that Devin Singletary is going to miss time or get his role reduced at some point in the season, which is, I guess, possible. And Brian Daboll did bring in both of these running backs himself, Devin Singletary over the offseason getting signed and Tracy in the draft. And I would cautiously be adding Tyrone Tracy. He's a decent handcuff. Just be aware of what you're getting yourself into. And speaking of that, I really would suggest you guys to be here for tomorrow's video on the traps in the waiver wire, players we don't want to be adding. It's a really good way to get the idea of both sides and just not do your team more disservice than you are actually helping it by dropping good players for players that aren't that valuable. So I drop those videos every Tuesday. Please make sure to be subscribed for those. I'd love to see you in them. But we need to add somebody on every side of the football in every position. Kirk Cousins is going to be a guy that we can go through and add. Now, his numbers are obviously going to be elevated a little bit from last week. He had 509 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, and almost 60 passing attempts, 35 fantasy points. Like, they really can't get much better than that. That kind of passing volume and number of attempts just cannot continue. It's pretty much impossible, but it has shown a ton of upside. If we look at the next few matchups for Kirk Cousins, they are very easy. They get the Panthers this week in week 6. We're starting Kirk Cousins in that matchup, followed by the Seahawks, Buccaneers, and also Dallas. Those should all be matchups that are pass first, very high scoring, and just a ton of offense in general, which is what we love to see for fantasy football. And Cousins has had a really tough start to the year. A lot of that can be credited to the defenses he's played. He's played the Steelers, the Eagles, the Chiefs, and the Saints. They're all pretty good. He's only getting more confident in himself with this offense and with this coaching scheme. I'd be starting him in this week's matchup and many more to come. But you guys know my favorite part of these videos is the defenses. Here are the guys you need to be streaming in week 6. Number 1 is going to be the Eagles, and I guarantee you they're going to be available in over 90% of leagues because they're just coming off a bye week. Most people aren't going to hold their defense through the bye week unless they're absolutely amazing like the Cowboys were last year. But even then, most people don't do that. They get a great matchup in week 6 this week against the Browns. And the Browns have so many issues literally everywhere in this offense. They could barely score 1 touchdown against the Commanders' depleted defense, which they've been looking a little bit better, but you can't score a touchdown against the Commanders. That's really, really bad. The Browns allow the 2nd most points to opposing defenses this year. Deshaun Watson is getting sacked at an insane rate. Like, it's just insane. It's so bad. The offensive line is terrible. There are so many issues here. And despite Watson and this offense being 6th in passing attempts, he hasn't had 1 game over 200 passing yards. If you watched any of the Browns games, he overthrows his receivers. There's really no way to describe it, except they look terrible. There's a real chance that Jameis Winston comes in at some point. I know everybody on the Browns coaching staff is saying Deshaun Watson is that guy, but it really could come to that point. But my number 2 defense this week is going to be the Houston Texans. They're barely rostered in leagues, but they get an amazing matchup here against the Patriots. They have the 2nd least points per game. They are only averaging 13 points a game. They allow some of the most points to opposing defenses. It's almost a guarantee that they're going to turn the ball over every single game at least 1 time. Their offensive line is terrible. Jacoby Brissett gets sacked a bunch. There's just so many opportunities for fantasy points. And the Texans defense itself is a pretty solid unit. Like, they've had their moments. The Falcons is another really good defense that get the Panthers this week. Another team that is top 5 in points allowed to opposing defenses. The Falcons defense have a pretty decent unit in themselves with some of their secondary. I know last week was a really high scoring game and they didn't look the best, but as we expected, the Andy Dalton experience is only coming back down to earth. Who knows who that quarterback is going to be next week, or at some point in the game they might switch out again like they did last week with Bryce Young. The Panthers offense isn't the best. They're not immune to turnovers, especially without Leggett, who they might not have this week. But thank you guys for watching this video. I will see you in the waiver wire trap video coming on Tuesday. I'd love to see you there. Thank you guys so much for watching this one.